really excited to be here at our very first in-person event, like Melody mentioned. It's really, really exciting as we've continued to grow out our SupplierWiki and education arm at Supply Pike. Those of you guys who have worked with us before or have attended our webinars, you know it's a really, really big deal that we try to empower the suppliers that are in the local area or outside of the United States to do their best work at Walmart and Sam's Club and Target and Kroger and Amazon. So we are really, really excited to have this event. And also thank you again to Josh, who is from Walmart. So everyone, round of applause for Josh as well, please, who has taken time out of his extremely busy schedule, I know how busy Walmart folks are, to come and talk to us about item swap. So you guys are going to hear it from a first-party source, which we're really, really excited about. So I'm going to go ahead and kick off the Q&A. Like Melody mentioned, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop them on the question cards, and Allie will go around and pick them up. But let's go ahead, Josh, and kind of kick it off with
Sounds good.
Pretty, hopefully, easy softball question for you. Could you explain at a high level kind of what item swap is? Why did Walmart decide to kind of start this initiative? Where did it come from? What are the driving forces behind it?
Yeah, so January of last year, obviously there was a lot of downstream implications of COVID and a lot of out-of-stock items. And it actually started from produce. So a little background in case you aren't aware. Produce uses what's called alt UPCs. So you can have multiple UPCs in like a split supplier program, so strawberries. They would oftentimes not have something in stock, and that they either want a completely different fruit or just another supplier of strawberries. If it's just strawberries, essentially what we would have to do is check in all multiple thousand mods again just to add a new UPC to the alt UPC chain. So we would just continually do that. Like every couple of weeks, we'd check in a whole new mod, and stores would get a new mod, and they'd be like, why did I get a new mod? Nothing changed. One strawberry change. So they asked us, hey, is there any way we can just give you a UPC and we can change it? So we said, sure, we can try. We did that. It actually worked out really well. And then we said, why can't every single category in the box just use this feature? It doesn't have anything to do with produce. So we tried that, and at this point, we're at pretty much 100% of the box. Item swap in general is you can one-for-one trade out a UPC on a modular. I know some people here who have a Walmart background have asked me, is it a slough? No, it's not a slough. It will swap out the item for everything that the store sees on the modular. And you will get a brand new mod at the store. But a merchant has a lot of flexibility to do it. It's not like they have to schedule labor hours and go through a whole mod reset. Just easy one in, one out at whatever time frame I guess your lead time is.
Okay. No, that's super helpful. So from what I'm hearing, you know, it seems to have been received pretty well at Walmart because we're now rolling it across the entire box. So it sounds like buyers and merchants are obviously aware of the program, and how are they taking it? Are they liking the flexibility that they're having? Are they utilizing item swap already? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so a lot of the use cases of item swap are still similar to produce. We have a lot of out of stocks. We're looking to get either new items from the same supplier or even other suppliers. I'm sure that's a question in the card. I guarantee that will be asked. It does not have to be the same supplier. I just wanted to be here to make sure we laid out everything that item swap is and is not. But yeah, so it's been received really well. I would say up until this point, it's been a lot of what we would call defense. So they're essentially, they either have an out of stock or a supplier has indicated that it's about to go out of stock, and they'll try to get ahead of it. That's slight offense, but where we really like to see it go is true offense in the fact that, hey, there's opportunities out there that we're not servicing our customer to our best ability. We don't want to wait all the way to the next modular cycle because the data is obvious. This is a great item, and the item that is on the mod might be terrible. How do we quickly swap in and swap out items to service our customer?
Okay, so, and I remember, Josh, it was talked about at the Supplier Growth Forum earlier this year that, you know, one of the examples of using that is kind of like what you mentioned. If there are in-stock issues, you can kind of swap an item out. But kind of what you're saying is you can also utilize item swap to really capture and maximize POS at store level. So I think one of the examples they gave was if you have a new flavor that's trending, you don't have to wait for the next modular reset. Can you give us some examples of item swaps that have already occurred that have been successful, just so people have an idea of, hey, maybe I can utilize item swap for this scenario?
Yeah, so I can give you an example from cat litter. I wouldn't encourage anyone to miss their modular timeline and be late with your innovation, but that is what happened. And there was a couple cat litter innovation SKUs that were, I guess you would call it a line extension, but a plus up in feature. They weren't able to make the mod. Generally, we would have just waited all the way to the next mod, but those SKUs took off at other pet retailers. And so we were able to come in, I think it was 12 weeks or so after the mod, and just swap one for those suppliers so they could get out of an older SKU and discontinue that line and move into their new innovation. It's been pretty successful.
Okay, that's really cool. And you mentioned kind of that one-for-one terminology. So
Yep.
could you maybe talk a little bit, Josh, about like the rules of item swap? So let's just say, hey, I have an item. I know it's going to be out of stock. I have another item. I'd like to bring this up with my buyer. What are some things that I need to make sure, the item kind of matches the criteria for before I actually go to my buyer or my merchant for that?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is size. So it's got to fit within the confounds of the space the previous item took, with exception of maybe if you're on pegs and you can demonstrate that there is additional room around your item and that the new swap will fit. On a shelf, we pretty much use 100% of the shelf space. Everything's really tight. Pegs aren't always the same because there's a lot of size variability. So in general, it needs to be very similar in size, but there's no limitation that it has to be. We've had scenarios where merchants have had 10 facings of something and the new item's a little bigger. So the new item took up 8. Not ideal, but it's better than selling nothing if you're out of stock. So, we can make it work.
Okay. And does the item have to be in the same price point? So if it was a, $9.97 item, does it have to be another $9.97 item, or can it be any price point?
It can be any price. So
Okay.
there are some details in the background. If you're swapping a extremely like-for-like item, you can keep the CIDs the same, and the stores will be instructed to place the new inventory behind the old inventory.
Okay.
In that case, you would want the retails the same, if not similar. But if it's an item swap and you're not doing a CID linkage, then it's fair game. Any retail difference probably needs to make sense relative to the modular flow. And you're not going to put Tide in the middle of gain,
Okay.
like something like that. You can, but
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
we're not going to move the item around.
Okay. So it basically is going to plug whatever hole you are swapping out. So
Exactly.
it's not something where you could say, hey, I have this item. It kind of makes sense in this category, but maybe it should be on the top right of the mod. Can we redraw it? It's not going to work like that.
Your merchant can still do that. There's no rules that they can't.
Right. Okay.
We've seen some mods that are way out of stock and you wouldn't think it makes sense in that spot, but when it's a sea full of empty shelves, you put whatever you can get on there.
Okay. Could you, Josh, maybe talk through, what are some kind of best practices that suppliers can utilize when they want to go talk to their merchants and, again, propose an item swap? What should they kind of have in their arsenal, their ammo, so to speak, to kind of make that conversation go a little bit easier with their merchants?
Yeah, so I would say if you're aware that you're going to go out of stock, be proactive. Let them know, and let them know you have a comparable solution to swap that item out with. Also, understand your current inventory position and how long it'll take to sell out of that. Because you don't want to propose a new item and then say, well, my lead time on my new item is 3 weeks, but if the merchant has 6 weeks of inventory and you execute it at 3 weeks, your merchant might ask for those markdowns for that 3 weeks that you're going to burn inventory. So be cognizant of how much inventory is there. I realize if it's not your item, you're not going to know that, and if you're proposing a different item. But on the defensive, I would say that. On the offensive, just arm yourself with some quality data and know that, hey, I'm proposing this item. It's doing well in the chain. I obviously have information about other items in the chain. I know what's struggling. So be proactive and recommend things. It's easier to set up if that item's already on our .com. So I would recommend to have the majority of your catalog on .com if that's feasible, because that way the merchant can quickly go to that .com item, set it up as a store by mirroring it to a store item and kind of just changing some attributes. And within a very short amount of time, we can have it set up. It works. It's future dated, so also be aware of when you want your inventory to land. Your buyer's going to need to know that because they're going to need to put it into the system.
Okay. No, that's really, really helpful. And really quickly, Josh, kind of, if I were to propose an item swap to my merchant, am I proposing that it's going to happen in every store that my item is in? So if I have, 4,700 full chain rollout, is item swap going to apply to all 4,700 stores, or what does that look like?
Nope, it's really flexible. You can do all the way down to individual store level. You can do mod level. You can even do future mod. So we've had scenarios where we've checked in and finalized mods and we know items aren't going to be here. So we swap them out before we even get there.
Okay.
So we don't check out mods and check them in. We just run a swap and it'll swap in the future. You can, if you're going out of stock or you have limited supply, you can trade out half the country. You can pick DCs and say, I want the West to do an item swap, but I still have some inventory that I can make out of one plant because I've lost two or whatever the case may be. You can keep those PODs in the stores they're already in. And the merchant can ebb and flow that. So even though we've executed the swap, say we'll do half the country, if something happens and your old item is a better item and now you get back in stock, you can undo the swap. To the store, it just looks like another item swap, but backwards.
Okay.
But you can do that.
Okay. So is there like a time expectation? So great example, rollbacks, they have to be a minimum of 90 days, for example. For item swap, what is that? Is there a timeline expectation?
At first, we set some guidelines in there around each category could go once per quarter, and you were only limited to 5. Merchants, surprisingly, haven't taken advantage of the stores yet, so we haven't been getting pushback from operations. They see the value in the swaps that are coming to them. It's generally a better item, or it's an item where they don't have an item. There's technically no limitations. The highest I've seen was a replacement of a relay for fishing lures. We did like over 100 in one swap. But they have 9,000 items, so 100 as a percent isn't that bad. So you can set it up and then do it, and then like a week later do it again if you needed to. Okay. I haven't seen anybody kind of like stack them up and stage them. One scenario we have had on a super short turnaround. So we had an item that was on feature, but non-modularized feature.
Right.
It did really well. Well, we have the inventory in stores. The feature was going to go away. Like, why mark down the feature? We executed an item swap. The item went from the feature to the side counter. I can set that up for, I think, 36 hours from the time I type it in, rounded to the next day. Okay. So that was like instant. There's no lead time. The product's already there in the store.
Right,
so,
right.
Like, you can go as quick as 2 days or as long as you need.
Okay. I'm curious, Josh, just kind of from your experience so far, I know it's kind of a newish initiative at Walmart. Are you seeing more suppliers pushing item swap, saying, hey, I've got a new item, or hey, there's a hole on your shelf, I would like to fill that? Or are you seeing it being a more buyer-led initiative of, hey, this item isn't performing well, I need you to recommend something else for me? Yeah,
from what I hear, at least, I'm obviously not in the trenches making all those decisions, but from what I hear, it's mostly buyer-led, which is part of the reason I'm here, because it doesn't have to be buyer-led. Right. Now, if you're shooting them an email every day with a proposed swap, I'm sure it'll get old. Like, you got to pick and choose your battles. But in general, I think it can come from both sides of the coin.
Okay. No, that's really, really helpful. So kind of adding on to that, Josh, that, as you mentioned, it can be a supplier-led initiative. Are there timelines that suppliers need to be aware of when presenting to merchants? So obviously, for example, with mod relays, it's your line review period. But for item swap, because it can happen anytime throughout the year, is it hey, we just are looking at data and this looks like a good opportunity, and buyer, let's talk about it?
Yeah, I would say you got to be careful around a modular season. So
sure.
if that item wasn't part of line review and your mods or your buyer's already deep in the mod process, right, they're probably not going to rework their mods to cut the item in. Now they could swap it in, but I probably wouldn't be proposing item swaps at the very end of a modular season.
Makes sense.
However, what we can do is you can item swap in your future inventory. Okay. So if you had a week 12 and you have the item now, the merchant wants the item now, you can swap it in week 10 on the current mod. The inventory will be there. It'll have some modular home. Then come week 12, you'll get your finalized home.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm kind of curious here, Josh, you alluded to it a little bit in the beginning. For item swap, we've talked a lot about suppliers being able to recommend item swaps for their own items. Can you also recommend item swap for a competitor's items or different, basically not your item in the modular? Does it happen? Is it happening?
You talk about recommend your item because you are the competitor, right? You're probably not going to recommend your competitor's items. Yes. There's no limitations on what the swap can be. Like, you can swap same vendor for same vendor, different vendor. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Have you seen? Is this usually going to be more applicable for like national brands, or does it work for private label items as well?
No, it works great. It works great for both.
Okay. Cool. And curious too, Josh, so you mentioned kind of it's been rolled out, about 99% of the box already. Are there different rules for different business units? So gen merch versus apparel versus whatever?
I would say there's got to be some consideration, and I've said it already, about lead time.
Right.
So I haven't seen a lot of swaps in committed buy worlds, but in theory they could, spot buy something in place of a committed buy that sold out really fast. So we don't see a ton in apparel in some of the seasonal categories. I think like furniture, some of those areas. Not that we couldn't, but we have had swaps in all 100% of SBUs, and I would say all but maybe a couple department numbers. We've had all of them.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep.
So it is an active thing. It's happening today. Item swaps are going on actively.
Yep. DSD is a little different, but to your merchant, it's no different. So yeah, you can do it in DSD now. That's a relatively new thing, maybe a couple months.
Okay.
But yeah, it should be 100% of the box that's modularized.
Okay, that makes sense. So curious question. For items where you are swapping out, kind of that idea that we had of, hey, I have an item that's a better performing item than the one that's currently on the modular. We want to swap that out. Can you talk about what happens to the inventory of the old, quote unquote, item? Does it get marked down? Does it get put on clearance? Who is kind of responsible for footing that bill of getting the inventory out of the store? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I'll step back a little bit and describe like how it's actually executed at the store. We're not generating a full brand new mod and sending it to the store the way Walmart typically does it. However, if the store opens their mod, they will see the swapped item on it. They do get a new mod, but not the way. They will get a task in their apps at store, and the department manager or the team lead, which is now it's called, executes these swaps. It's not the overnight team. So it's actually people who understand your category more than the overnight mod setting team. Awesome. But it directs them to that exact position on the mod, and it prints that exact label. We're not printing a sheet of labels and telling you to change them all. We're printing that one. But I said earlier, based on the CID, it instructs the store what to do. Okay. Literally in the app, it walks you through and tells you different things. Most of them are non-CID swaps, and it will instruct the associate to take that inventory off the shelf and take it to modular clearance as if it were the same as a modular delete.
Okay.
As far as markdowns, it's up to the discretion of the merchant. I can't say, it's not auto assigned to the supplier. It's a conversation that you'll have to have and understand.
Okay. So definitely something, probably a good insight for suppliers that are wanting to do this is also understand your inventory position at stores, because you may be responsible for helping to kind of mark that down with Walmart potentially.
Correct.
Okay. That's really helpful. So could you talk through, Josh, the actual kind of mechanics of item swap? So let's just say I have an item. The buyer's like, yes, let's do it. Makes a lot of sense. What do I do? Am I setting this up on item 360? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so generally you would go through the same process you would do for a modular relay. It's practically the same. Okay. Unless you already have your items set up, then there is no setup required.
Right.
You can item swap with items that are already in the store. Like if you want more points of distribution, say you're only on the 12 foot, you can, and then cut down logic, you can execute swaps on the 8. So that's there's zero supplier set up there except for the conversation that the merchant probably should have with you to let you know that you're about to increase PODs and make sure that you can actually fulfill those orders.
Right.
There's obviously, some, if you go from 2,000 stores to 4,000 stores tomorrow, you're going to struggle, but I assume.
Okay. And then I assume kind of, as you said, it's very similar to just a modular relay execution. So yes, Walmart buyer says, yes, let's do it. Let's go ahead and make that item swap. You'll get POs as if it's a mod set, I assume. And then
I know it will look out and see future validity and will understand your lead times and your order window and your order dates and will order. It does not come through exactly the same as a future mod. It won't get the sticker from the
Right.
RDC, but
Okay.
other than that, it's pretty much the same.
Okay. And I assume too, based on what we're talking about, all of the same OTIF rules are going to apply. SQEP rules are going to apply to the new item
it's
swapped
standard
out.
Well, if you're on GRS, it's
Right.
standard GRS ordering.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And curious question too, Josh. So, kind of everything that we've talked about so far has been very quote unquote manual. So it's the supplier kind of keeping an eye on their inventory or keeping an eye on their sales performance and making a suggestion, or the buyer doing the same. Does Walmart have any mechanisms in place to maybe bubble up a not great performing item to the top and say, hey, maybe we should do item swap for this item? Or is it still mostly manual today?
It's still mostly manual. And even that concept is not automated, but we do have something, we coined the term swappertunity. So it's a dashboard.
You heard it here first, folks.
It's a dashboard that your modulars have access to. It's mostly for, you can kind of use it backwards and forwards. You can say, hey, what items are performing poorly on my mod?
Mm-hmm.
And then reach into your e-com space to understand what similar items, because it's even trying to align dimensions to get similar dimensions and similar fine lines and attributes. So it's trying to recommend what are high performing e-com items that probably should take the place of that. Either they're poor performing or out of stock, which obviously they'd be poor performing and out of stock. Or you can potentially use the dashboard backwards and start with great e-com items and try to find items to swap.
Oh, interesting.
That's relatively new. Like I said, most of the item swaps so far have been defensive, but we welcome the idea of more item swaps because it's better for the customer.
Okay, so as we're kind of helping suppliers think about best practices around item swap. So we should, do you recommend that suppliers shouldn't be thinking of this as like a one-off thing and, hey, if I have an inventory issue, then I'll start thinking about item swap? Should they just be constantly actively looking at their modular, looking at performance, thinking about item swap opportunities always?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with that unless your merchant at some point has some pushback. But I think for now, I would say, yeah, just always be thinking about how do you maximize revenue for the customer.
Okay. No, that's really, really helpful. And could you talk, Josh, so kind of putting the buyer lens on, the merchant lens on, can you talk through how buyers are kind of leveraging item swap today? I know you kind of mentioned the defensive and offensive part.
Yep.
So is it mostly just to make sure that there's product on the shelf today, or what are they really trying to maximize?
Yeah, it's mostly that. There is a couple additional things that merchants have been thinking through, and some of them have actually canceled their regular mod relay and executed only swaps.
Oh.
Because from a labor perspective, it's much more efficient at stores. So we do have some DMMs that are encouraging their merchants to try to execute swaps more often and large sweeping fundamental modular changes less often. It's happened here and there. Like I said, fishing. There's been a couple more. I think Frozen did it.
Okay.
There's a few, but that would be one additional way that they've kind of utilized item swap, and some of them are even planning for it. Like, I know I have a supplier, but they're not on mod schedule. I can't get this item to you for 12 weeks. They just leave an old, what should have been a deleted item on the mod as a placeholder for a future swap.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I don't know how you use that to your advantage or whatever, but like just because you're not on modular schedule, like I said, I don't encourage you getting off modular schedule, but
Right.
in case you aren't, there's also that.
Okay. And so this may be a silly question, but could you talk through, so kind of one of the categories that comes to my mind is like impulse or clip strips, which is a slightly different, not quite modularized. Would item swap count for them, or would you just say, hey, just let the clip strip do its thing, and then if you want a new item, talk to the buyer?
Yeah, I would just talk to the clip strip buyer. He can probably send in another clip strip.
Okay.
Clip strips aren't modularized, so it doesn't work in that case.
Okay. Does this work too, Josh? So obviously kind of super centers and things like that. Does this work for like neighborhood market as well?
Yeah, it works for all stores except for an FC.
Okay. And I'm curious too, Josh. So, obviously this is a Walmart US initiative. Do you see this expanding out into Walmart International, Walmart Canada, Walmart Mexico, or is this already taking place internationally?
I don't think it is, but we have conversations with those teams, so I wouldn't be surprised. But I have no idea.
Okay. And if teams do have questions about the item swap process, I'm not going to put you on the spot and make you share your email address, but who should they be reaching out to? Is it directly with the merchant? Should they be working with your team? What does that look like?
No, my team is only support for merchants when we have complex scenarios and somebody wants to do like a 5-way swap and have
what is a 5-way swap?
I mean, you don't have to be one for one. You can be two.
Now.
You can be 2 for 1.
Okay.
Like in the strawberries example.
Okay.
I might find 4 new farms. I put them in, and one farm gets Florida, one farm gets Georgia, one farm gets whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, so there are people that come to us with complex things, and then they'll reach out to my team for help. But as far as just everyday item swaps and proposals, definitely start with your merchant.
Okay. Very, very helpful. So we talked about this a little bit, but maybe we could get a little bit more in depth on the process for setting up an item swap. So is there anything suppliers need to do, or is it all merchant driven? So sounds like kind of step 1, reach out to the merchant. Step 2, get them approving and kind of on the same page, and then setting up an item as if it's just a regular modular relay.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
It's just like a modular relay, except it happens a lot more frequently.
Okay.
Yeah, your item setup should be the same.
Okay, cool. Very helpful. Okay, so here's a good one. So for seasonal items, so we've talked a lot about kind of just regular everyday items. Does item swap help reduce the complexity of building a mod with half of the stores with item A and half with item B?
I would say the components that I spoke about at the very start, Alt UPC helps with that complexity. Because we can draw one modular and then we can say these stores get item A and these stores get item B if we're talking about like for like. I don't foresee the only way item swap helps with that is if mid-season you need to realign that distribution, the stores that get realigned will get an item swap activity in that store-specific app.
Right.
I guess that's about the only way that's doing it. We're not changing the way we draw modulars because of item swap, with the exception of some buyers are holding out and leaving placeholders there for a future item swap.
And kind of an add-on to that, Josh, are you seeing item swap happen more often with seasonal programs or more with just kind of everyday replenishment? Just curious.
Like I said, seasonal is usually committed by.
Right.
So we aren't seeing it there as often because they have such a long lead time. I doubt you can pivot and get something new in. Some of the long lead time GM categories are, once they realize an item's going to be late, doing a swap and bringing back. Sorry, there's a bug on me. They're bringing back some of their deleted items to reduce markdowns and try to hold on to inventory and shelf space until the new item gets here. But no, we see it mostly on everyday items.
Okay. So we got a question on markdowns. I know we talked a little bit about that. So when the swap is complete, how are markdowns handled? So I know sometimes they can be handled through co-ops and things like that. What does that look like?
You're getting into the territory I don't deal with very often.
Okay.
Right now, it's a manual markdown. I don't actually know how the actual payments for the markdowns are, but we are trying to make it similar to the mod markdown process, so it will run off the same markdown cadence that your category runs off of. But today it's a manual markdown, so you're just have a conversation with your merchant.
Okay.
I don't know all those details.
Okay, and is that something that the merchant and the supplier could probably agree with beforehand to say this is how we're going to handle the markdown, and then it happens, and then they do it that way?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. So here's a fun one. We're getting into spicy territory. What if our merchant is not aware of or does not understand the process? What kind of guidance would you recommend in those scenarios?
Yeah, that's a good question. We obviously have a lot of new merchants and they don't always know everything that's available to them. I would say do what suppliers are good at, which is leverage your network of either other merchants maybe DMM, something to that. If you have that sort of connection and you have that good of a story to bother utilizing that connection. Otherwise, you could probably encourage your merchant to reach out to my team and say, hey, I think this works. Will you run it by Josh Tubbs or the centralized team?
Okay.
And they can reach out.
Okay, Josh said you guys can use his name, so just so you know.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell them the internal link. If you tell them to go to WM-link/item swap, internal person, if they type that in their browser, will go to the Q&A section and all our training and videos and all that. But
okay, and we'll make sure that we kind of are able to share those resources. Yeah, you guys, suppliers can't, but if you're at Walmart, that's where you go. Is item swap done in ISAM? So I think it's
just done in the normal modular system. Like it uses regular item file.
Okay. Question, Josh, is item swap in Sam's Club as well, or just Walmart right now?
It is not at Sam's Club in the same way, but I know they do swap items on planograms. They're store-specific planograms, so they're a little different. I know they can swap, but it's not exactly the same process.
Okay.
But they can.
Okay. So here's a good one. So we've talked a lot about kind of how the item swap process works once we've all agreed to it and everything. But is there an app in Retail Link that they need to utilize, or just straight email to the merchant?
Yeah, it's just from a supplier perspective, it's straight email to the merchant and conversation. It's
okay.
For internal Walmart, it's not in Retail Link either. We just have a UI that they use to do it.
Okay. Very helpful.